Back in October 2024, we took down some mostly dead trees that resulted in all this brush and that fence in the background there, that stacked wood fence. I saved a bunch of these branches. I tried to do the ones that were sturdier and straighter because in the back of my mind, I knew I wanted to create a decorative fence. I've always been intrigued by wattle fencing, but we didn't have any real flexible pieces of wood, of branches to use for that type of fence. So this stacked wood fence was ideal, but I still wanted to do something a little different. So with these inspiration pictures of something that I wanted to work on, this is how I started. Today's the day. I've got my wheelbarrow out and I'm going to start by picking again some straight branches that are long enough to work for my 36 by 36 inch hurdle fence. I think I've got enough here in this first barrel, along with some that will be the uprights for this process. It's late January and it's expected to get nearly 60 degrees, so this is a good day to get started. Here's a little mock-up of what I want to do fence-wise. I'm going to cut two pieces of 2x2 pressure-treated lumber, 33 inches, and two pieces, 36 inches, to create a 36 by 36 inch panel. I'm going to put two screws in each corner. So I picked out the drill bit that will work with the screws that I've got. And we're going to see if we can get this together today. We're going to see how long the first panel takes us. Eventually, I need 11 panels, two of which will become a gate. And so, again, we're just kind of playing here to see what we can create. These pieces of wood are 33 inches apart, so I've just divided by 4 to get 8¼ inches. So every 8¼ inches, I'm making a little mark so I know where I'm going to drill. But then I'm going to come back, and since the wood is 2" by 2". Your actual measurement is 1.5 inches. So I'm putting a mark, a little hash mark, so I know exactly where to drill these 3 holes. And these you're shooting for roughly between 1/2 inch and 3/4. 3/4 is better. It just allows you a little more playroom when you're weaving. It's going to make sure if you go deeper, it makes sure that these uprights won't come out while you're weaving the wood. Then you're going to flip the wood upside down and do the same measurements on the top. Again, about 3/4 inch deep. Now, while I was over at the wood pile, I tried to pick out about 3 pieces that looked like they would be good candidates for the uprights. And unfortunately, I didn't save them out, so I had to kind of dig through this wood again. Here you can see these are about 3/4 inch thick on the thick side. And so I started using my Dremel to kind of whittle these down. This was not going to work fast enough. So just pull out a utility knife with a new blade on it. You're just going to whittle these down so you've got roughly about 1 inch of the branch that is going to fit into your 1/2 inch hole. And so here you can see I'm just testing it out. And a couple of these I did have to go back and make them the actual whittled part longer. So I started out with about 1/2 inch, but you'll want to make sure that it's at least 1 inch of 1/2 inch thickness. And that will allow that to fit easily up into your frame. Here I'm measuring to length, and your distance that you're going to do is 33 inches, but you've got 3/4 inch on either side. So you'll want to add 1.5 inches. So make these at least 34.5 inches long, and then you can always cut them back, which is what I had to do to make them fit. Now, this first frame, I mentioned I'm kind of playing around here. And so this is going to get easier the more frames that I put together. Here you can see is my first go round, and I've got a good 1/2 inch. That one is a little short, and it does give me a little bit of problem, which ends up being fine. I'm going to undo the bottom of this frame. So those 4 screws that we put in on the bottom, I'm actually going to back out halfway so I can fit these bottoms in. And it didn't go perfectly. I had to cut one of them shorter by about a half an inch. But when they start bending as you're putting the frame back together, you know they're too long. So now we're going to start our weaving process. And I think originally I was trimming off all the little extra little twig branches that were coming out. That's not necessary. So I only did that on the first couple of ones. Here you can see I'm trying to figure out exactly how this is going to work. And if you're doing only 3 uprights, you're going to have to use the frame as part of the upright to keep the branches in place, which I wasn't totally in love with. But the good thing about doing this is it allows you to use bigger pieces of branch, which just means that you can use fewer branches and it makes the weaving process a little easier. So on this first one, I wasn't really good about trimming the ends to be even with the end of the frame. And that's something that I'll do better the next time. Having made a couple of these now, I can tell you that what has worked for me best is to get the thick part of the branch in first and then weave the thinner end of the branch. This allowed me to maneuver this heavy, thick part first and do less cutting on the end. I had to use my loppers to cut the ends on the thick branches, whereas I can just use my little trimmers, my handheld trimmer, to do the thin end of the branch. And that's true for the most part. Here you can see a close up. And you, if you're like me, you'll want to keep the edges even with the end of the frame. In the middle, that was kind of how I judged everything. The first one was out, the next one was in, so on and so forth. So you'll notice on this branch, I do trim it, but then I look and I'm like, oops, I forgot to weave it the opposite way. So I've got to take that out and start over again. And I just tried to, inside, outside. Oops, here I go. I'm finally realizing my mistake and getting that corrected. So here's a pretty good view of the way that I found it worked the best for me is get that thick end in and then up against the upright to the right distance, which I think it looks best if you keep these all even with the end. And if the ends are all flat, that particular branch, the end was not flat. It was kind of cut at a bevel. I just think they look better when they're even. That's something I'll do on my future panels to make sure they're all the same. And then you'll also want to get a look back. You want to kind of look at it and make sure that it's even from left to right. So I didn't go so far as to pull out my level, but I did look back several times as I was weaving these branches to make sure that they were even. And also sometimes you might have to pull one out and just reposition it because of the curve of the branch. If you're using willow or some other kind of wood that's not curved, you're not going to have this issue. But for me, we did have that issue quite a bit. You will get into a rhythm when you're doing this. The thin branches, like the one I'm doing right now, are obviously much easier and easier to cut, easier to weave. The thicker branches take a little more jigging, rigging, pleating with them to go in. But all in all, it does a pretty good job. Now, these branches are somewhat green, or they were back in October. These trees we assume were all dead, but it turns out there was quite a bit of green to them. So there is some flexibility to the branches, but in some cases, the branches, they just broke. And in this particular frame, I had 3 branches that broke, and it's just part of the deal. So there's one that's going right there. And shortly after that, I had number 2. And then when I was nearly at the top, I had a 3rd one break. Most of the time, if the branches are long enough, you can still use them. Just cut off at the broken part and you're good to go. So that's what the first panel looked like. You can see the three uprights. I think it looks pretty darn good. I would, in the future, like I said, make sure that the branches come out to the end of the frame, and that way you can just keep everything even. These movable panels are called hurdles. And the gentleman that I watched his YouTube video on making his hurdles really inspired this fence. But I did like his design because the branches didn't stick out past the frame. So I've decided my next sample hurdle is going to be a 5 branch hurdle to see how that compares with this 3 branch upright hurdle. And when that sample was completed, this is what it looked like. You can tell there's 5 uprights. I'll get a little closer so you can see how I did that. Now, these branches were not as straight, the uprights, as the first one. And that's something that I would try to do better in the future, to make sure your uprights are as straight as possible. If you do have crooked ones, put those on the 3 inside uprights, because if they're crooked on the ends, they start to bow in and out, and it doesn't work quite as well. And in this case, both of those end pieces bowed out. The other suggestion I would make in doing this style is to not cut your branches totally until the very end. So even if you do have these end pieces bowing out some, you're not going to lose the weave. In this case, down at the bottom, some of the branches sprung out from the last 2 hurdle uprights, and that gave a little problem. But all in all, you can't really tell unless you were looking at it, uh, with a very critical eye. This is not my purpose in this to be critical about it. I'm just playing, so I want to see what's going to work for the 11 panels that I'm going to be making. Having said that, I would love your suggestions. If this is something that you've done before or something you're thinking about, if you have some suggestions, let me know. A friend asked if I had soaked the branches beforehand, and no, I did not. But I think the next time I do this 5 upright hurdle, I'll soak at least in a 5-gallon bucket the thick ends of the branches to see if that helps. The 3-panel upright took about 40 branches. This 5-panel one, I had to use thinner branches, so it took closer to 50. So it does take quite a bit of plant material, tree debris, if you will, to make these. But I think it's just such a cool way to use up something that would have gone to the burn pile or into possibly your community recycling, or yard debris kind of situation. So I am absolutely thrilled with how both of these panels look, and I can't wait to finish this project. So we will have a part 2 of this video coming up as I probably go to complete it and install it. I'll give you a second part so you can see how it ends up looking. Thanks for being here, guys. Please like and subscribe if you like this content.